Nutrition and nutrition restriction is not benign. And this is exactly why we have to consider a diagnosis prior to making nutrition changes, most importantly, before implementing a restrictive diet. Hi, my name is Andrea Hardy. I'm a registered dietitian, and this is Ask a Dietitian Live. I host it every single Monday to answer your nutrition questions. I'm a gut health expert, and I'm particularly interested in improving people's food relationship. And today I want to talk about why you need a diagnosis prior to making nutrition changes. So, as you guys know, I primarily work in gastrointestinal disorders, and so many people come to me, and they come to me with a list of, 10, 12, 14 foods that they're comfortable eating. And the rest of them are off limits or poo-pooed because they've had symptoms occur because of those foods. And so between restrictive diets on what they found online, between symptoms, between having reactions to foods, they've cut out a lot of foods and they've ended up with a safe foods list that is really, really restrictive. And the problem with this is there's just so many things that can go wrong when we follow a restrictive diet, especially when we're solely basing it off of our symptoms without guidance. So when it comes to IBS and gastrointestinal disorders, I like to explain food intolerances, so tolerance to things like FODMAPs, kind of like a bucket effect. So everyone has a different size bucket, and somebody without IBS may have a very large bucket in which they can consume all of these foods and their bucket never fills up and overflows. However, for someone without IBS, they may have a very small bucket, and as they eat things like FODMAPs or other gastrointestinal triggers, their bucket may fill up, and when it overflows is where they get symptoms. So people assume, I ate, a salad for lunch with peppers and then I felt unwell. Therefore, I can never eat peppers again. However, we know it's very likely a compound effect of what they've eaten probably over the last 24 to 48 hours, contributing to their symptoms. So when it comes to self-diagnosis of nutrition intolerances in that way, we often really fall short and we restrict needlessly. Another really important thing about making sure that you have a diagnosis prior to making nutrition changes is, of course, celiac disease. So, of course, I don't know, I think the gluten trend may be kind of waning now, thank God. Of course, there's people who need to restrict gluten, and these are people with celiac disease. However, people maybe with celiac disease haven't been tested, have GI issues, and then cut out gluten because they think they need to, then makes it much harder to diagnose. So for blood tests, we need you to consume gluten. For intestinal biopsy, gluten consumption is required because they actually have to see villus damage, and you actually need the antibodies in your blood. So continuing on your regular diet until you see your family doctor and discuss your gut issues, and then get tested for celiac disease, very likely via blood test if the symptoms indicate. And making sure that you get that ruled out prior to following a restrictive diet is really important, because there's all these people walking around who have restricted wheat, restricted gluten-containing grain products, and are now on an extremely strict diet and aren't comfortable liberalizing their diet to get that test done properly. And so they might be unnecessarily a lot stricter than perhaps they need to be. Perhaps it's the fructans in wheat that were contributing to their symptoms, so that's a FODMAP, rather than the gluten, which typically people react to when they have celiac disease, or perhaps a subset of population who has non-celiac gluten sensitivity. And so perhaps they did not need to cut out that gluten and therefore are avoiding, foods that say may contain gluten. They might not need to avoid that. They might be able to have things like, soy sauce and condiments and share a toaster with somebody and all of this sort of stuff. So those are definitely things to consider. And I think making sure that people get the proper celiac diagnosis is important prior to restriction. Another reason why you should have a diagnosis prior to restriction is to make sure that we're treating what we actually think we're treating. So I'm sure everybody's heard of the placebo effect, and the placebo effect assumes that if you take this medicine, and in this case, medicine is often food, you will feel better. And unfortunately, as a dietitian, I see people give food way too much weight. Food is, medicine, and food is the cure-all, and food is going to do all these wonderful things. However, health is so much more complicated than that, and we give nutrition way, way too much credit a lot of the time. And because we've started to tie nutrition into our value system, into our worthiness, into our status, it just muddies the waters that much more. So there's the placebo effect, assuming that if I eat a certain way, I will feel better. But then there's also the nocebo effect. And a lot of people haven't heard of this. And the nocebo effect is the fact that if you eat something, you think it's going to make you sick, therefore it makes you sick. Or if you take this particular thing, negative outcomes will happen. And so it's the power of our brain, our bodies, our brain-gut reaction that can cause those symptoms when those symptoms might not necessarily be there. So we have positive or negative results, but actually that's not what should be happening in the body. So a lot of times people develop really negative relationships around food, a lot of stress around trusting that their body is able to do exactly what it needs to do in terms of digestion, and often ending up quite fearful around food. And that fear around food, it's kind of like the Pavlov dog experiment. So if you guys don't know, Pavlov trained his dog. He rang a bell before he fed him, and then the dog got to the point where when you rang the bell, he started salivating in anticipation of the food. If you're constantly fearful of like, oh, when I eat at so-and-so's house, I don't know what they put in their food, but it always makes me sick, you're priming your body to have a negative reaction. And so, starting to make sure we actually get a diagnosis so we know actually what we should be conscious of consuming rather than, fearful of the vast majority of foods is really important. Another big thing is variety, and I know you guys have heard me talk about this a lot, is variety is super important when it comes to gut health. And your gut microbiome likes a variety of different foods, a variety of different fibers, a variety of different carbohydrates, a variety of different fats and antioxidants and polyphenols to metabolize and to keep the microbiome healthy and happy. And when you restrict, you kind of, restrict your gut bacteria from food as well. So instead of feast, it's famine. And so variety is really important for gut health, and something that oftentimes I think people forget. They think if I just eat chicken and lettuce and potatoes every day, then I will be just fine. When in fact, that could be doing some harmful things to your microbiome in terms of diversity of bacteria and number or abundance of bacteria. Lastly, and I think most importantly, is quality of life. So in this day and age, we're so food fixated. We're so obsessed with what we put in our bodies and the reactions that occur. And I think, honestly, we put way, way, way too much weight on food. And I think sometimes we need to take a step back and recognize that health is about so much more than food, and quality of life and satisfaction and food for enjoyment and making space for, all the other things that occur outside of the metabolism of food. So that brain gut reaction, understanding that body distrust may be there if we have chronic GI issues, working on all of those things and understanding that food is just a piece of it is really important. So I guess the challenge lies in that a lot of my patients don't get a very confident diagnosis of IBS, and I think more importantly, aren't given avenues for treatment. And I was talking with one of my really good friends yesterday about where Ignite kind of shines and what I do differently that really offers my clients something else. And I really think it comes down to making sure that I often call myself almost a care coordinator. So making sure that my patients have the proper diagnosis, medical treatment, making sure that they're in touch with the other team members in terms of an interdisciplinary care team, whether that's psychology or hypnotherapy or physiotherapy or, somebody who can help them with mindfulness or their gastroenterologists, or making sure that, all of those cogs in the wheel are working together to make sure that we get you proper diagnosis as well as adequate treatment. Because I see far too many people who are being undertreated or poorly managed in terms of IBS. And I see a lot of like Band-Aid solution, here's the latest drug on the market, let's try it, let's see what happens, rather than taking a look holistically at all of the moving pieces. And of course, drugs absolutely play a role. However, I often say if you have mild to moderate IBS, maybe food first is the best approach. And then sometimes we can use medications more strategically that way, or maybe use a lesser medication with lesser side effects or safer for longer term use. And I see far too many people being like, this medication is new on the market, let's give it a try, let's see how that works. And so many people are inadequately managed. In fact, a survey on IBSnet, which I am an author for, found that 92% of people with IBS are not satisfied with how their IBS is managed. And that just absolutely breaks my heart. I like to say that I like 75 to 80% of my patients to feel 75 to 80% better within 4 weeks of starting to work on nutrition changes. And of course, there's always those people outside of that in which we start to say, okay, what else is going on? What else do we need to consider outside of nutrition, in regards to medication management, in regards to differential diagnoses, in regards to, other things that could be going on, like the gut-brain reaction. And if we need to consider, therapy, if we need to consider some sort of treatment to help manage how we perceive our gut symptoms, if there's something else going on we're missing. So ultimately, I really think that diagnosis is so key before you start jumping on all these January crazy diets. Make sure you get to your family doctor. Make sure you're well versed in what you think the condition might be, and don't exclude IBS, because oftentimes I think people jump right to like, I have celiac disease, I have IBD, or I have colon cancer. And of course, those things need to be ruled out if you have the risk factors for them. However, 15 to 20% of Canadians have IBS. Yet when people come to me, they're like, I think it's IBS. My doctor thinks it's IBS, but isn't that a catch-all? Isn't that just, a diagnosis of exclusion? And the fact of the matter is that it's not. If you hop over to ignitenutrition.ca, I'll put the link below after in the show notes. You can read all about what constitutes an IBS diagnosis, so that when you go to see your family doctor and you guys discuss this, it's something that, you can say, well, my symptoms present like this. Do you think it could possibly be this? And is there any red flags that you see that you think we need to rule out before assuming it's an IBS diagnosis? And from there, then you guys can look at appropriate treatment options. So ruling out celiac disease first if you are, if your doctor assumes that you're at risk of that, or if your symptoms lead them to believe. I think most people with IBS symptoms should get a celiac blood screening test, and then from there decide what the best treatment options should be. And I'd say at Ignite, we're really good at coordinating care, food first, and then working with all of the moving parts of the system. So that very interdisciplinary holistic care. I feel like this turned into what patients should be doing to really maximize their care. And I think that's super important. I'm super passionate about it, and I can't wait to bring you all these great things this year. If you guys have any questions, make sure you ask below. It seems pretty quiet today. I haven't had a lot of questions pop up. I actually haven't had any questions pop up, but that's okay. If you guys do have any questions, shoot me an email at info@ignitenutrition.ca, and I will answer them in a coming episode of Ask a Dietitian Live. If you liked this video, make sure that you like and comment. It really helps to improve things in terms of how many people Facebook decides to show my videos to, or YouTube decides to show my videos to. So make sure you like it, you comment it, and then subscribe to our channel if you're on YouTube. I will see you guys all next week. Happy January, happy 2018, and I can't wait to help so many of you feel better this year. Bye.